players in 3 days to try to cope with everything. But we have two ways. Or we forget about the new idea, and I think that's why I was here. I was brought here in the middle of the season, and we try to cope with the things that I used to do it, and next year in the same stage we'll be here with the same problems. Or we start now, we risk a little bit, we suffer a little bit, and in the next year we will be better at this point, so we have to risk it a little bit. We are going to suffer for a long period, and we will try to win games. This will take time, but I know we have to win games.
We certainly could have won it, so you could look at it that way. It depends on your perspective. I think we were certainly the better team in the first half overall, and I thought as the first half went on we really grew in ascendancy and went into half-time in real dominance. But the second half, Man United had some good periods of control as well.
So Mark, United playing for the first time under Amorim. Were there any noticeable differences in the way they set up?
Yeah, lots of interesting tweaks and changes. Obviously only a matter of days into the new era at Old Trafford, so you'd expect it to be fairly similar, but with a couple of new things. It was actually, for Manchester United, the first time they've had over 600 passes in a game this season. So ball possession, clearly something that Amorim wants to impose upon the side. Let's take a look at the way they set up, because it was a very different formation. They lined up with 3 at the back. You can see Diego Dalot and Amad Diallo as wing-backs there. And I think the other significant change is when you look at this, the front 3, Marcus Rashford, who you normally see out on the left-hand side cutting in field, he was playing as the number 9. You got Garnacho, who'd normally play on the right, on the left, and then Bruno Fernandes playing in that 2 behind Marcus Rashford as well. So a very different role. But that's essentially what Amorim wants from his side. He loves 3 at the back with the wing-back, so they've got that solidity when they're defending, but the opportunity to get it out wide when they go forward. So, yeah, that was quite an interesting change, which we knew we were going to see for Manchester United. When you compare that to United's previous game against Leicester, where they lined up in a 4-2-3-1 formation, you can see the changes. Like we say, Rashford out on the right, Diallo playing as an inside forward or a high winger compared to playing as a wing back. Obviously the back 4 as well, very different. And then obviously the 2 pivots in the middle of the park there. So yeah, that's the difference between Manchester United against Ipswich and then United against Leicester. Obviously there are small differences with regards to players as well. We mentioned Bruno Fernandes, who's been such an important part of Manchester United over the last few years, hasn't he? Playing in a different role. And Garnacho playing in a different role. Let's take a look at the heat maps. And this gives you an indication as to perhaps where things may be tweaked and changed. Now, this is the heat map against Ipswich. You can see on the right-hand side where you are stood, Garnacho. He comes out wide. He's playing in a 2 behind Marcus Rashford, but he still wants to operate down that left-hand flank. So you're not seeing a great deal of difference in terms of his heat map in the game. However, I think this is really significantly different. Look at Bruno Fernandes. You'd normally see him operating in these areas, advanced attacking midfield areas. However, defensive responsibility, clearly something that Ruben Amorim wants Bruno Fernandes to look at, and he spoke about it in the press conference after the game. He's got that ability to see passes, play forward, be progressive with the way he takes Manchester United up the pitch. If he's receiving the ball in these areas, he can't do that. However, when he's getting the ball in his own half, he's got a whole pitch to look at and try and make things happen for Manchester United because he does have that passing range. But interesting to see a very different heat map for that man, Bruno Fernandes. So it'll be interesting to see how the new Manchester United boss makes these tweaks and changes, how he tries to adapt and create a Manchester United that are not only going to take on teams, win games and be more like the United we've seen in the past, but obviously some of the post-match comments have probably suggested it's going to take a little bit longer than Manchester United fans would expect. So it'll be interesting to see how these tweaks and changes develop game upon game. So a very different looking United.
Let's focus on United then. Kaveh, Amorim, what's your first impressions of him? Do you think he's a good fit for United?
I think he's made a very good first impression. I think he did really well in his final 3 games at Sporting as well, because he was in a difficult position where he was going to be the United manager, but he still had to manage Sporting, and he handled that and all the media interest really, really well. And ever since he's landed in England, he looks the deal. The way he talks as well. You can imagine the way he communicates with his players will maybe inspire them a little bit more than the way Erik ten Hag used to speak to them. I think it'll be really interesting to see how United are going to play, because obviously they're going to change formation, play 3-4-2-1. I think they're going to be more attacking, more on the front foot the whole time. They're going to be a more exciting side to watch. So, first impressions, very, very good. But of course, the proof is going to be in how they perform and how the players react to him.
Yeah, and that's what he says in that interview, isn't it? I'm going to be judged on that, not really about everything else. But I think there is that sort of charm to him that everyone's kind of lured into a little bit in the moment. You know, we saw a really nice interview in terms of when he was still at Sporting and the joking around. He sat in the press conference watching one of his players get interviewed. There's a lot of, joie de vivre going on here. Get me on a Sunday morning. I know. But we've discussed, though, haven't we, at length on this programme about managers needing presence. And is that something that, comes across in abundance here? And that's actually quite what United need right now.
Well, I've got my phone out, right? Because I'll be real. When we were looking at this footage on Friday, I was texting you all the way through.
Yeah.
And I was saying to you all of the different things that really jumped out about him. He's a fantastic communicator, but he has a way about him. He has charisma. And you can see that in the way that he relates to Gary. I mean, Gary's done some terrific interviews already, and you can see why people open up to Gary because of the standing he has in the game, in the sport. But there is something very different. I am the most excited about Amorim than I've been about any manager since Sir Alex Ferguson. And that's quite a big thing to say, but I think
statement,
he's 39 years of age, has a connection with the dressing room already. No, United
You
manager.
mean at United?
United manager.
Sorry. Sorry.
But even when Mourinho came
including Mourinho. I think Mourinho should have gone after Sir Alex. Not that when at the point. I think they missed an opportunity to get him at a time when he could really have done something with the club. And I think by the time Mourinho went in, there was already this obsession with big names without enough of an emphasis on the team and building. And we know that he's a fantastic team builder. And I think now they understand that you've got to have somebody who has everything, who can build a culture. And that's what he did at Sporting. And that's quite key in terms of some of the things he was saying, because when he answered that question about Marcus and Casemiro going away, he was saying the club is really the issue, not the individual players, because they worked within the culture that was set for them. And he is all about building a culture. When you refer to those last 3 games at Sporting, the reason they did so well in those last 3 games is because the culture was right. Even though he was leaving, the players still knew what their jobs were and they still knew what the standard was. And that's what I mean about being excited about him, but also about the way that he has it in his interviews, because he's a young manager, but you don't mess with him. You know what you get from him. In the Fuller edit of that, he says, the club came to me because they know what I stand for. They know what I'm about. And he appreciates the fact that he is now in charge of a superpower in world football, but he has to, and he has to be able to restore them, as he did with Sporting, to where they once were, and he can only do that by repairing that culture, and that's why I'm so excited about him.
It's interesting, you talk about the situation with Casemiro and Marcus Rashford as well, going away to New York for Marcus Rashford, certainly. And he defended, actually, both his players, didn't he? And like you say, he talked about the club, the fact that the club had let them have 5 days off. There was no restrictions. It wasn't don't fly during those 5 days. So he defended that.
Well, just before Carvey answers, I just want to say, I also like something else he said in there where he said, I would rather get the sack before I throw any of my players under the bus. Again, it's in the Fuller Reddit, 25 minutes, but it seems like 10, the way you're just captivated by what he's saying. And I love that, because I don't think it's either player's fault. I'm jumping in a little bit here before you cover, but I'm putting my cards on the table. I don't think it's either player's fault, and I think he doesn't think it's either player's fault. He says, I've been following the whole thing all the way through, and what the players have been doing is what they have been allowed to do. And just one final thing on this. I remember when, before I ever got into journalism, I'd see some of the older guard talking about if a team lost a match of players, almost as if a player's got to go in and sit in a darkened room and not smile for the subsequent week or whatever until the next game. And this is that conversation in the modern era. Players are human. We bang on about mental health and perspective and looking after yourselves and actually realising that there are bigger things in the game. And then we're upset that Marcus is doing what works for Marcus. You know, and the wonderful thing about Amorim is that he's very different to Ten Hag, is that Ten Hag was very good tactically. Amorim is very good in terms of man management. And I don't think he's going to go in and crack the whip. I think those days for the big players, you've talked to all of the big managers as part of this show, those days are over. It's about having to understand players and treat them like men, and I think he'll do that with Marcus Rashford.
Well, Bruno talks about not wanting to upset the rules, but where do you stand on this situation with Casemiro and Rashford? What's your thoughts?
I think it was a storm in a teacup.
Yeah.
And I think it's time we smash the teacup because I do not, for the life of me, see what Marcus Rashford has done wrong. He had time off, he flew to New York, and he went to a basketball game. What's wrong with that? I mean, is there an issue with the way he dresses, or the fact that he was wearing jewellery, or the fact that he went to a basketball game? If he'd been wearing a button-down shirt from Marks and Spencer's and he went to a
Others are available.
Soccer game, would we be having this kind of conversation? It seems to be something that follows Marcus Rashford around. It also follows Raheem Sterling around, this sort of focus on everything he does and trying to turn him just living his life into a negative. And as for Casemiro, I mean, he went on holiday with his family to, was it Disney World? I mean, they had 5 days off. If Manchester United had said to them, you are not allowed to leave this country, you're not allowed to get on a plane, I'm sure they would have stayed in Manchester. If they'd been told you need to come in for training, I'm sure that's what they would have done. But this is a club in transition. They were moving from one manager to another. Ruben Amorim was flying in. The players had been told you've got 5 days off. And I think it's time we just drew a line under this and let Marcus Rashford and also Raheem Sterling just live their lives. If they do something really, really wrong that warrants it being, you know, on the back pages or on the front pages, fine, they'll deal with it. But if they're just leading their lives, leave them alone.
Be amazed. Ruben Amorim proved Manchester United's critic wrong once and can do it again. When Manchester United faced Ruben Amorim's first match in charge of Ipswich, many critics were quick to dismiss his tactics, claiming his formation wouldn't work in the Premier League. Just 90 minutes into the game, his style was swiftly torn apart and thrown aside. A lacklustre draw against an Ipswich side that had already taken points off Aston Villa and Tottenham this season was enough to convince some that Amorim's approach was destined for failure. However, Amorim set up his team in his favoured 3-4-3 formation, just as he had promised, and this system immediately paid off with a brilliantly worked opening goal after just 81 seconds. The movement from the back to the front was fluid, involving superb passing and individual skill. This was a glimpse of the attacking philosophy the 39-year-old manager intends to bring to the Premier League. It wasn't entirely surprising, then, that things didn't flow perfectly from the start at Portman Road, especially with the team still feeling the effects of injuries and international fatigue. Once Amorim is able to field his strongest 11, which will likely include Lainery Euro, Lisandro Martinez, Manuel Ugarte, Kobbie Mainoo, and possibly Luke Shaw, we'll start to see the system truly take shape. With each passing game, these players will become more comfortable in the system, and the results will follow. Time on the training ground is always limited during the season, but as they grow more accustomed to Amorim's tactics, their cohesion will improve. Amorim has enjoyed immense success with this system. Under his guidance, Sporting won 2 league titles and were on track for a third. Earlier this month, his Sporting team dominated Manchester City, defeating the Premier League champions 4-1. Yet, after just 2 training sessions and 1 Premier League match, some critics are already urging him to abandon his system. Danny Murphy, speaking on Match of the Day, said, "I'd be surprised if they're still playing a 3-4-3 a year from now. This league is very, very different from the continental leagues." Chelsea were the only team in recent years to win using this system. And let's be honest, they had N'Golo, Kunta, Nemanja, Matic in midfield, and Diego Costa up top with Eden Hazard supporting him. Murphy continued, "You can't replicate that kind of quality with just anyone. It costs hundreds of millions to get the best players in the world. And when you play with 3 at the back against most of the good teams in our league, who play with 3 in attack, you end up being 5 at the back, which is really difficult to handle." But this claim doesn't hold up when we consider that Sporting's 3-4-3 formation caused significant problems for Manchester City in the Champions League. On that night, leaving 3 men forward worked wonders, and City struggled to contain it. In Sunday's match, United often attacked with 5 players, with fullbacks pushing forward to form an attacking line. While they were sometimes called upon to defend, United now has midfielders in deeper positions who can plug any gaps defensively. Amorim's system is designed to dominate possession and avoid being forced into a defensive 5-4-1. The biggest challenge Amorim faced at Ipswich was the unfamiliarity of the players with his system and their lack of physicality. While this issue won't be solved overnight, more energy and intensity are needed for it to thrive. If those elements come together, there's no doubt that a back 3 can succeed in the Premier League. United faces challenges in the early days of the Amorim era, but his system isn't one of them. Give it time, and it could prove to be a winning formula.